Well, don't do too much of that until you hear what I have to say. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. This presentation is actually all about using the Mac. And if you're like myself and are totally blind, you really have two access strategies for the Mac. One is to use what we call electronic or refreshable Braille, which I'm actually using right here to drive this presentation. But I don't have time to spend on Braille today, unfortunately. But the second approach is to use synthetic speech. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. But if you want to know more about electronic Braille and more about all the other strategies that Apple has provided for all different kinds of disabilities, I invite you to check out a book by Shelley Brisbane. It's called iOS Access for All. And it's available at iosaccessbook.com. And it's also in the iBook store. She covers all that Apple's doing with the various disabilities. It's a very excellent book. So this presentation is going to be an audio presentation. I'm going to challenge you a bit here to learn with your ears for the next few minutes. If I was Chuck Joyner, I'd have a very fancy PowerPoint, but since I'm just me, it's going to be learning with your ears. And to help you a little bit stay focused, because I know when one is using their ears, her mind tends to wander, there are 4 things that I want you to listen out for as we go along here. A chicken leg, a handsome prince, a beautiful woman, and a song you've never heard. Again, just like all fairy tales, we have a chicken leg, a handsome prince, a beautiful woman, and a song that you've never heard. Now, in the late 1970s, early 1980s, 2 California companies came out with products that changed my life. Apple came out with the Apple IIe, and a company called Street Electronics introduced a speech synthesizer called the Echo 2 speech synthesizer. They also shipped a piece of software with the Echo 2 called Text Talker. And when you install the Echo 2 circuit board inside your Apple IIe in one of Steve Wozniak's expansion slots, and you loaded up the Text Talker software, what you did was turn your Apple IIe into a talking computer. And so what that meant was, whenever you typed something on the keyboard, that information was simultaneously displayed on the screen and spoken aloud by the Echo 2 speech synthesizer. I'm going to let you hear a little bit of that Echo 2 synthetic speech right now. I want to encourage you to listen hard to try to understand as much as you can of this synthetic voice. I want you to particularly listen out for the words chicken leg. And if you hear chicken leg, I want you to reward yourself with a big old grin, because that means you're listening hard.
The birch panels lit on the smooth planks. Illumina sheet to the dark blue background. It's easy to tell the depth of they well. These days a chicken leg is a rare dish.
All right, so just for my edification, if you heard the word chicken leg, say yes. If you did not hear chicken leg, say no. Oh boy, we got work to do here. But there's good news ahead. Synthetic speech has gotten a lot better than it was back in the late 70s, early 80s. So it didn't take long for a man by the name of David Holliday to write some additional software which turned this Apple IIe from just a talking computer into a full-fledged word processor. And at that time, I was a 26-year-old young man who was blind, about to head off from North Carolina to Florida to begin work on my PhD in psychology. And I was in real need of a talking word processor, because that talking word processor allowed me to independently write, edit, revise, and review my work for the first time in my life. And believe me, those skills are critical if you're going to succeed in a PhD program. Well, I did succeed. I earned my PhD, and I used that talking word processor all through the entire program, and even used it to write my dissertation. But during the second year of my program, which was 1984, Apple threw me a major curveball. Honestly, it was more like a knockout punch. They introduced the replacement for the Apple IIe, which was the Apple Macintosh. For the sighted person, the Mac was great. But for a blind person, the Mac didn't do text, it did graphics. Speech synthesizers don't do graphics, they do text. Sending a graphic to a speech synthesizer is like showing a blind guy a photograph. You get nothing back. So I became very worried, honestly, because I felt like when my Apple IIe had worn out or became obsolete or broke down, that I'd be back to using the old manual typewriter that I used starting in first grade, where I could touch type my work, and I could turn it into my teachers and they could read it, but I couldn't read it or edit it or revise it. Those were dark days. Believe me, it's no fun to type something that you can't read and revise, and it's impractical to do that as a graduate student or later on in life as a practicing psychologist. You need to have access to your written information. So I was really kind of depressed, honestly, about the future. But I soon came to hear about a lot of these little companies that were springing up who were creating screen reading software and hardware speech synthesizers and selling these packages to blind people who needed access to their computers. Now, these weren't access to Macs. This was access to what we called back then the IBM PC and the IBM clone. They ran the Microsoft operating systems. But there was a lot of competition, so everyone was trying to create the best screen reader and create the best speech synthesizer. So it wasn't long before all the blind people, including myself, had to move over to the IBM PC and the IBM clones because that's where the accessibility was. There was one company that created accessibility for the Mac with a screen reader called Outspoken. The company was called Berkeley Systems, but it didn't catch on. The competition was just too great on the Microsoft side. So that was the case from 1984 until about 2005. For 21 years, I like to think of those years as the Sleeping Beauty years for the Mac. If you're a blind person, silent, slumbering, no access. Sleeping Beauty. 21 years. But in 2005, an extraordinarily handsome prince by the name of Stephen Paul Jobs walked up and gave his Mac a big old kiss right on the lips. Now, some of you don't know your Mac has lips, but this is why you come to Macstock, is to learn stuff like this. So Steve walked up and gave his Mac a big old smack-a-mac, and he said, "You are going to wake up and become accessible to blind people." So the Apple engineers got to work, as Apple engineers always do, to carry out the bidding of the handsome prince, and they created a screen reader for the Mac called VoiceOver. Now, it quickly became apparent that VoiceOver was very different from these screen readers that these third-party developers had been creating for the Microsoft platform. And some of the ways that it is different is, first of all, VoiceOver is built in to the operating system. It's embedded inside OS X. Whereas the Windows screen readers had to be bolted on top of Windows because these were third-party developers. Apple owns the whole widget. So when you have a screen reader that's built in to the operating system, here are just a few advantages that you have. First of all, I can walk up to any Mac, anywhere, as long as it's running OS 10.4 Tiger or later. I can press Command F5, and within 20 seconds or so, turn that Mac from an inaccessible computer into a fully accessible Mac that I can use with VoiceOver with no problem. I can walk into an Apple store, I can buy a Mac, if my wife will let me, and as soon as I power that Mac up for the first time, if I don't touch the keyboard or the pointing device for a minute or two, the operating system will automatically load up VoiceOver and offer to verbally guide me through the setup of my new Mac. And then, of course, there's that day that we all dread, that dreaded day. No, I'm not talking about death. That'll be my next year's presentation. But I'm talking about that dreaded day when we have to nuke and pave, reformat our hard drive, and reinstall the operating system. Because VoiceOver is built in, it'll talk me through every step of the reformatting and the reinstallation. The Windows installer is not accessible. The sound drivers don't even get loaded in Windows until very late in the installation process. Finally, how much did you pay for OS 10 El Capitan? That's exactly what I paid for VoiceOver, because it's built in, not bolted on. But if you need the very latest Windows screen reader that most people consider to be the best, you'll pay about $2,000 for it. But, as was often the case in 2005, 2006, the handsome prince was not satisfied. And he said, I want the Mac to speak with a very clear voice. I want it to sound almost human-like. I want it to even breathe when it's speaking. So, the Apple engineers did what they always do. They got back to work, very hard work, night and day, to carry out the command of the handsome prince. And they created a speech synthesizer for the Mac called Alex. I'm going to let you hear a little bit of Alex right now.
Hello, this is Alex. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to speak at Macstock. Thanks, Robert. Now that I have the microphone, you will never get it back.
Alex, as most young kids do, you misunderstood Ray Kurzweil. He said the singularity is near, not the singularity is here.
Yeah, look who's talking.
Exactly. My point exactly, Alex. Look who's talking. All right. So you can see there was really quite an improvement over what was available in late 1970s, early 80s, and in what Alex sounded like. We made a lot of progress in those years. What does this mean for me as a blind Mac user in 2016? Well, it means that I get to use a state-of-the-art screen reader. Apple has continued to develop VoiceOver and improve it with every release of OS 10. It keeps getting better. It's become very popular. And Apple has remained very committed to VoiceOver. They've even added it to all their other products. Every other current Apple product that's available has VoiceOver built into it. So, interestingly enough, I do most of the same things on my Mac that you do. And I use the same software that you use. For example, I do a podcast along with my co-host Allison called the Tech Doctor Podcast. And we record our podcast with a piece of software called Audio Hijack. Now, Audio Hijack is an extremely visual piece of software. It was designed so that a sighted person can look at the screen and see exactly how her audio is connected together. You do this by looking at an audio grid. That audio grid and all the rest of Audio Hijack is fully accessible to VoiceOver. So it's equally usable by a blind person and a sighted person. And secondly, we use a piece of software that's very popular for sighted people to edit our audio. It's called Amadeus Pro. It's a very popular multi-track audio editor, and it works great on the screen, and it works great for VoiceOver. I'm going to play you an example right now of how I go about editing Tech Doctor podcast audio.
Okay, I'm sitting in front of my MacBook, and I'm going to Command-Tab over to Amadeus Pro, where I have the audio file that I want to edit loaded.
Amadeus Pro, audio to be edited.aiff window, scroll area.
So VoiceOver just verified that I was in the correct window in Amadeus Pro. Now I'm going to play the audio file in Amadeus Pro that I want to edit. Hello. Welcome to the Tech Doctor podcast. Obviously, no self-respecting podcaster is going to allow that throat clearing and that stuttering to be part of the intro to his or her podcast. So let's get rid of that. I'm going to start the file playing again and pause it just after the hello. Hello. I'm going to now move my insertion point to where my playhead is.
Move insertion point to playhead.
Now I'm going to set a marker right here just after hello. I'm going to continue playing the file and pause it just after the throat clearing and the stuttering. I'm now going to move my insertion point to my playhead again.
Move insertion point to playhead.
I'm going to now select from where I currently am back to the marker that I set.
Extend to previous marker.
Now if I play the portion of the audio that's selected, you can hear what's selected. If we want to preview what the file is going to sound like without this audio in it, we can do that. Now I'm going to delete the selected portion of the file.
Delete.
And now we will play the file from the beginning. Hello, welcome to the Tech Doctor podcast. So as you can see, we cleaned up the file and now we have a lovely Tech Doctor welcome.
So that's how we edit audio with VoiceOver and Amadeus Pro. I've got 3 things to do to finish up this presentation. First of all, I want to thank you all for accepting my challenge to learn through your ears here. You've been a great audience, and I really appreciate you taking this on, because it's nice to see how, well, the other folks live sometimes. And secondly, I want to take just a moment of personal privilege and tell you that my wife, Vicki, is here. And Vicki was there 34 years ago when we first made that Apple IIe talk. And just to be honest with you, I'm extremely grateful every day that Vicki and I choose to share our lives together. We do better together than we would do apart. Vicki, please stand and wave and let them see where you are. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the beautiful woman that's at the heart of this story. Now I have one more thing to do. I promised you a song that you've never heard. So I made up a song for you all. I played it on my guitar and I sang it into my iPhone. The song is called Macstock Rocks. So with Sincere apologies to Loggins and Messina. Here for you. Your Mac won't dance and your phone don't rock and roll. Your Mac don't dance and your phone don't rock and roll. That's why you come to Macstock to get your tech under control. Tim Cook said buy an Apple TV 4th gen. Watching Netflix is great and you just can't wait to tune in. Remote is upside down, no picture, no sound, you need Macstock again. Your Mac don't dance and your phone don't rock and roll. Your Mac don't dance and your phone don't rock and roll. That's why you come to Macstock, your tech is so out of control. Driving to Chicago with no place to park, no directions on your Apple Watch, it's way too dark. Is it one tap for left or one tap for right? Thank God there's a Macstock barbecue tonight. And it's all because your Mac don't dance and your phone don't rock and roll. Your Mac don't dance and your phone don't rock and roll. That's why you come to Macstock, your tech is so out of control. Your Mac don't dance and your phone don't rock and roll. Your Mac don't dance and your phone don't rock and roll. That's why you come to Macstock to get your tech under control. Under control. Out of control. Under control. Thank you all very much. Rock on, Macstock.
Awesome job, Dr. Coleman.